Hi, everyone. If you've just happened upon this YouTube channel and you don't know who I am, let me say, my name is Michele Tracy Berger. I'm a scholar, an award-winning creative writer, and a creativity coach. I specialize in helping writers understand the submission process so that they can get more of their work into the world with joy and ease. And today, I wanted to share some insights that I have about lessons learned related to my recent breakthrough teaching Zumba. Now, I relate everything back to writing, and so I'm going to share the story with you about Zumba and talk about how it relates to writing. And in doing that, I want us to be thinking about, want you to be thinking about where is resistance showing up for you? Because this is definitely, my story is really about the sneaky faces of procrastination, perfectionism, and resistance. And I think looking at other creative endeavors can always help us think about how this shows up related to our writing. So when I was a young person, love dance, and almost went into trying to become a professional dancer. So that was a long time ago, had to let that go, but I still love dance. I discovered Zumba, great movement-based activity, in 2018. And I think that probably prevented me from going full into burnout. I didn't even realize how stressed I was. So I discovered it in 2018, loved it. And I had teachers at the time who said, you really enjoy it. You have great expression, think about teaching. And I was like, no, I can't do that. Anyway, 2020 comes along and there we are, none of us able to go to the things that we love to do, gyms, dance studios. So I decided I'm going to take Zumba as an online training. And so I did that in August 2020. And I told myself I'm only taking it so that I can keep myself fit and because, I love that kind of group energy. Now, I will say doing an online training is, at least for me, it was really challenging. It was like 8 hours and, it was all online. It was very difficult to do. And after that, the teacher encouraged us to right away try to start teaching online. And I didn't want to do that. And so 2020 rolls through and I've not taught at all. 2021 comes around. And at that time, I'm still not teaching, but I go and I take a private Zumba class on my birthday. I was traveling and found a Zumba teacher and he was great. And so we take a picture and unbeknownst to me, I didn't realize he was going to do this. Later on later that day or the next day, he posts the picture of him and I in front of a, giant Zumba sign. And he says, hey, got to dance with this instructor, Michele Tracy Berger. So that's on my Facebook page. So all of a sudden, my Zumba teachers in the place that I was living at the time are like, what's going on? Why haven't you told us? Why aren't you teaching? So there's all this pressure building up of teaching. And at the time, so 2021, the resistance is so high. Like I really don't want to teach, or I had that conflict. And you may find a little bit of that related to thinking about what does it mean when you tell people that you're a writer, right? Because a lot of times when we're disclosing that, there's this kind of push-pull tension between us. Like we want to tell people, but then kind of that feeling of like, oh my goodness, what are people going to say? And what are they going to expect of me? So I was already having that. So I say, okay, 2022 comes along and I'm like, okay, I think I would want to teach one song. And I, try to start working on that, but didn't really have a structure. And I had so many excuses, y'all. I mean, the excuses seemed insurmountable. I was like, I don't have a mirror at home. I have a small house. I don't know where I would practice. So all of these things. So one of my Zumba teachers said, okay, well, why don't you'll co-lead with me. So we started working together. Resistance is still high. And I didn't do that publicly, but her and I were training. And so finally, I do it one time in her class. And that was the summer, I think, of 2022. And I was like, okay, I've done it. I've sweated. It was difficult, but I've done it. So I think, okay, it's all done. Then my other Zumba teacher hears that I did it in her class, and she's like, well, why aren't you teaching in my class? So then now, and that teacher is very different. And I thought, oh my goodness, okay, now it's like, and that was a bigger class. And so again, resistance is still really strong. I keep saying, oh, I don't have a mirror at home. It's so hard for me. And then the person who owns the Y, where the Zumba class was being held, basically says, oh, well, you can use our studio. If you don't have a place to practice, to see yourself, come to the studio, come to the Y. And so that excuse was gone. So does this sound familiar? So in terms of being a writer, the excuses that we might make up that seem insurmountable, but that, as those excuses get revealed to us, that we really see that it's our perfectionism, right? So I decided, okay, I'm gonna try to do one. My goal was to lead one song in a class. Like I made my goals very, very like lower than the floor, below the floor in the basement, because I was like, okay, I can do this. I'm going to do this. So it was very stressful, but I did it, and I felt like a zombie. Like I had this crazy grin. I didn't feel very embodied when I was teaching, leading that one song in the class, but I did it. And then I said, okay, I'm done. I did it. I've reached my goal, and I don't need to do this again. But in the back of my head, I was kind of thinking, because I have such admiration for Zumba teachers, I thought, maybe somewhere I could do that. Like, it could be different than that experience that I had, which wasn't a bad experience. So the two times where I co-led, or I led a song in the class, it wasn't a bad experience. It just felt, new and unusual in my body, right? Which is often how, as we're moving through our writing career, it can feel, to kind of get that practice over time, it can feel kind of weird. Like I'm doing these things, I'm trying these things on. So I actually moved from where I was living. I took a new position, and I was in a different city. And my Zumba teacher said, hey, one of the first things you need to do is find Zumba and start teaching, because no one knows you there. It'll be easier to get started. Just go and do it. So I had this in my mind. And I think, when we think about writing, the ways in which our community really helps to support us is important. To kind of provide checks and balances, kind of some accountability. So here I am in the new city, literally. I moved here 4 months ago, and I find a Zumba class. And so I go there and I get in the front, and I'm like doing my thing. And afterwards, the teacher comes up to me and she's like, hey, she actually asked me, are you a Zumba instructor? And I was like, no, no, no. And then I gave this long story, like, oh, I'm emerging, and I did it over here and I did it over there. Which, when you think about it, think about your writing life. A lot of times we tell stories about where we think we are in the journey. And so when my teacher sort of saw me and acknowledged, like, oh, you're doing the choreography, you've done this before, I was like, no, I had this whole story, like I tried to do it and I'm not really doing it. So as those weeks, the last couple of weeks progressed, I found out my Zumba teacher here is pregnant. And I found out that there were a number of other women about my age, late 40s, early 50s, who also got trained during the pandemic, who did not ever teach. So when I was talking with them, so we find out our teacher's pregnant, she's going to go on maternity leave very soon. Something kind of clicked in me, and I saw that there were all of us, these women, all around the same age, all having done the training, who they had never taught. And when I asked them, why haven't you taught? We all clearly love Zumba. Basically, they said, oh, one of them said, I have to be perfect in order to do that. And I said, wait a minute. So you know how you can help other people before you help yourself? I said, wait a minute. Zumba is not about perfection. It's not even about getting the steps right necessarily. It's about fun. And I said, why don't we do this? Why don't we each learn 2 or 3 songs, and over the next couple of weeks, our teacher can give us space in her class to teach those songs. So I organized everyone, and people were like, yeah, okay, we're going to do it. And then we had a group text thread. And then in some ways it took the pressure off, because I thought, I'm doing this for the group good. I'm doing this to help somebody. Sometimes we won't do things for ourselves in the same way that we'll do something for another person. And I thought, oh, we're support. The other thing is that we're supporting each other. This group of women who've all been trained to teach Zumba, who've never taught or led a class, we're going to do this. So as it's getting closer to that time, so the teacher is on the text thread with us, and she's like, great, okay, Michele, you're going at this time, or, I volunteered to go and the other person volunteered to go. And as it's getting closer, y'all, I'm just thinking, so many excuses. So I'm trying to break things down. I'm breaking the songs down into, like, working on it 5 minutes at a time, practice. And then I just say, okay, I'm going to let go. I'm going to do the best that I can. But also thinking about, as a creativity coach, I'm always telling people that the most important thing is, in terms of creative spirit, is to get out of what Matthew Fox calls adultism. A lot of times as we move through our lives, we really have this, really heavily developed inner critics. And if you're a creative writer, creative person, you've probably, battled with those inner critics. And those inner critics are really about helping you save face, making sure you don't face shame and embarrassment, but they're hyper developed, right? And they really prevent us from doing the things that we most want to do. So as it's coming to the day, I'm starting to do my affirmations. I am telling myself, I never have to see these people again. Like I'm kind of going through all of these things, like, so to get myself amped up. But the other thing that I did that was really helpful, which may help you, is a long time ago, I had to give a presentation somewhere, and I was frustrated with the talk, but I had to step back from that kind of perfectionist space. And I told myself, okay, you might think it's a pig, but they don't know it's a pig. And so I often say to myself, okay, because remember, if you have perfectionist tendencies, your baseline is so much higher usually than where it needs to be, right? So you usually are seeing all the flaws in something. So I was telling myself, okay, they don't know it's a pig. I just need to be competent. And so I use that mindset in terms of doing the Zumba songs. So I got to class and I smiled. I actually felt embodied. I said, hey, this is my first time. I'm so happy to do this. I'm a bit nervous. And I just went into it, and I did my 2 songs. And then the woman who was also a new instructor, she did her 3 songs. We had so much fun, like the joy of pushing through that perfectionism and procrastination was just amazing, and the resistance. And then I did it the next week, and I did 2 songs the next week. And I have to say, one song went really well. I actually was even more nervous, shockingly. And the next song didn't go so well. One song was kind of a flamenco song, and the next song was a really fast song. And my teacher said at the time, so the first time it was, I felt like it was flawless. I was very embodied. And then the second time, I was to be honest, I was a little bit deflated, because that second song didn't go quite as well as I wanted it to. And she said, look, there's waves. She's like, as you're getting used to teaching, you're going to have some ups and downs, right? You're going to, even if you feel like you know it, and I knew the steps, when each situation is different, and it's going to take you a while, right? So the other thing I want to say about having done it with the other woman who was doing it with me, the joy on her face, the ability to be present and not feel like I had to be perfect for both of us. So the joy of seeing her accomplish something was really powerful. And I think as writers and creative community, we also receive such amazing power when we help other people move through their blocks. So showing up for other people is really important. So let me just try to mine that story for you of Zumba. You might want to think about, if you if you are that have that sense of high perfectionism, high resistance, you might want to ask yourself, you know, is there a way that you can be more accountable with other people as a writer to kind of reduce some of that? You can ask yourself, how is perfectionism and procrastination serving you? How is resistance serving you? And usually, the answer we're going to get that it's really not serving us. It's really keeping us from living a bigger life, a more visible life. There are other things also in thinking about. So my perfectionism protected me from having to feel those uncomfortable feelings of, is this good? Am I going to do it right? But really, when we're present to our work, when we're present to our creative life, we find that those questions, we just live those questions. What's the worst thing that can happen? So for me, the worst thing that could happen, right, was that I was going to mess up. I was going to forget the steps. Well, professional Zumba teachers forget steps all the time, and the really amazing ones, they laugh in the middle of it. It's like they do their solo, or they're like, you're not going to. I had to really remind myself, I wasn't going to die. I wasn't going to, fall through the floor. Like, really, nothing terrible was going to happen to me except to feel a few minutes of uncomfortability. So if perfectionism is keeping you from sending out something, you have to think, what's the worst thing that's going to happen? I know a lot of emerging writers, a lot of new writers really struggle in the submission process. They struggle with getting their work into the world. And, I always say submissions are about building relationships. Yes, it's no fun getting rejected, but you learn from that. And you also, each rejection is one step closer to an acceptance, right? So some things that you can do if you are facing deep resistance to moving forward in your writing life. You can set some specific goals for yourself, and they can be incremental. So it took me 3 years to get from my online training to actually leading just 2 songs, right? Like I'm ready now to lead more songs, but it took me that long. So, things don't have to magically happen overnight. So if you feel like you're making good progress, keep doing that. Create a routine for yourself. Try to start small. And I think particularly, like, let's say you are an emerging writer and you want to send more of your work out. That's a way you can use this process, setting specific goals, creating routine, to do that in a more incremental way. And of course, practice. So work on your writing, work on your craft. And most writers know to do that anyway. Get feedback. So remember, in my story, I had different Zumba instructors in different classes who kind of encouraged me, right? So you want to get feedback on where you are. So if you're not in a writing community, if you're not in a writing class, it's really important. I think one of the most important things too is embrace imperfection, right? As creative people, perfection is something that freezes us. It makes us immobile. It doesn't really contribute to our growth. Remember that writing, creating is a process. It's okay to make mistakes. And then, finally, 2 other things. Make sure you're in a community, right? So my community, being accountable to this group of women that I didn't even know well, because I just moved here, we were accountable to each other. And, those of us who started teaching, doing this 2 or 3 songs, we have moved further along than the folks who haven't, but we're still supporting them. So what kind of community do you need to really move your writing forward? And sometimes it's that accountability, like, hey, I need a virtual buddy. It can be anything from, like, I'm going to post my goals in my writing community. I'm going to ask to be held accountable. I'm going to do some virtual writing buddy things where, you text someone at 9 a.m. and say, I'm sitting down to write, and by 2, I want to have this done. And they check back in with you. That's really, really important. And then I would say, finally, stay inspired. Listen to podcasts, talk to people, read books, do things that keep you in that high learning, high energy. The whole time that I was working toward becoming, doing Zumba more consistently, I was reading about Zumba, I was listening to choreography, I was listening to podcasts, and obviously with writing, it's very similar. Like there's so much energy and wealth of knowledge out there that can keep us moving forward. So if you're interested in more inspiration, sign up to my newsletter below. I love providing support and encouragement to my writing community. And I also will have a link below about how to be a writer in public, because that's part of this whole idea of, there's moving. A lot of us don't feel comfortable moving forward with our writing and announcing that we're writers. And so I have a blog post about, being a writer in public. And I'd love to hear thoughts that you might have, insights, things that this might have brought up for you. Let me also know if you're a Zumba or a dance person. Love to connect with you. And just keep creating, keep being yourself. It's so important. And stay inspired, stay writing, stay creative.